On the night of December 24th, 1945, in a small town in West Virginia called Fayetteville, a family sat together in a warm house and celebrated Christmas Eve. There were presents, there was laughter. The younger children begged to stay up late and their mother said yes. By sunrise on Christmas morning, that house was gone, and 5 of those children had vanished from the face of the earth. No bodies were ever recovered, no bones, no teeth, no trace. And to this day, more than 80 years later, no one can say with certainty what happened to the Soder children. This is their story. George Soder was born Giorgio Sodo in Sardinia, Italy in 1895. He came to America alone at the age of 13 and found work hauling water and supplies for railroad crews in Pennsylvania. He was tough, resourceful, and determined. Within a few years, he had made his way to the coal country of West Virginia, where he started in a trucking company hauling freight and coal. He married a woman named Jenny, also of Italian descent, and together they had 10 children. By all accounts, they were a hard-working, close-knit family living a full and noisy life in a 2-story wooden house just outside of town. George was also outspoken. He had strong opinions, especially about politics, and he was not shy about sharing them. In particular, he was openly critical of the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, and in a small coal town in the 1940s where Italian immigrant communities were tightly woven and not everyone shared his views, that kind of talk did not go unnoticed. In October of 1945, just 2 months before the fire, a man came to the Soder home to sell George a life insurance policy. George was not interested, and he declined. And according to the family, the salesman became angry. He warned George that his house would go up in smoke and that his children would be destroyed. He said it was because of the dirty things George had been saying about Mussolini. A few weeks later, another man showed up at the house, this time asking about hauling work. He wandered around to the back of the property, pointed at the fuse boxes on the outside wall, and said something strange. He said those boxes were going to cause a fire someday. George thought it was an odd comment. The house had just been rewired. The local power company had inspected it and declared it safe. Then there was the car. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, George's older sons noticed the same unfamiliar vehicle parked along the main road through town more than once. Its occupants appeared to be watching the younger Soder children as they walked home from school. No one recognized the car. No one could explain it. And then came Christmas Eve. 9 of the 10 Soder children were home that night. The oldest son, Joe, was away serving in the army during the war. The rest of the family celebrated together. Marion, the eldest daughter, had come home from her job at a dime store in town carrying new toys she had bought as gifts for 3 of her little sisters. The younger kids were overjoyed. They begged their parents to let them stay up late. Jenny agreed, on the condition that they lock the front door, close the curtains, and turn off the lights before going to bed. The children promised they would. George and the 2 older boys, John and George Jr., went to bed first. Jenny took 2-year-old Sylvia upstairs with her. Marion and the 5 younger children stayed up to play. At about 12:30 in the morning, the phone rang. Jenny got out of bed and went downstairs to answer it. On the other end was a woman she did not recognize, asking for someone who did not live there. In the background, Jenny could hear the sound of glasses clinking and people laughing, like a party. When Jenny told the woman she had the wrong number, the woman let out a strange, unsettling laugh and hung up. Before going back to bed, Jenny noticed something. The front door was still unlocked. The lights were still on. The curtains were still open. Marion had fallen asleep on the couch, but the 5 younger children were nowhere in sight. Jenny assumed they had gone upstairs to bed, so she locked the door, switched off the lights, closed the curtains, and returned to her room. Not long after, she was jolted awake by a loud thud on the roof, followed by a rolling sound like something tumbling down the shingles. She waited. Nothing else came, so she drifted back towards sleep. The next time she opened her eyes, it was because of the smell. The smoke. Jenny rushed out of bed to find his downstairs office fully engulfed in flames. She screamed for George. He woke the older boys. Together they grabbed Sylvia and fled the house. Marion escaped from the couch. John and George Jr. made it out, their hair singed. But the staircase heading to the second floor, where the 5 youngest children were supposed to be sleeping, was already a wall of fire. George tried to get back inside. He broke a window and reached in, slicing a deep gash across his arm. The heat and smoke forced him back. He ran to get the ladder. He always kept leaning against the side of the house. It was gone. He ran to his truck, thinking he could back it up beneath the second floor window and climb onto the roof, but the truck would not start. It had worked perfectly the day before. Marion ran to a neighbor's house to call the fire department, but the phone line was dead. Eventually, someone reached the Fayetteville Fire Department, but no truck came. Not until 8 o'clock the next morning, more than 7 hours after the fire began. By then, the 2-story wooden house had been reduced to a pile of ash and rubble barely a few feet high. Fire Chief F.J. Morris arrived. Survived was left and declared that the 5 missing children, 14-year-old Maurice, 12-year-old Martha, 9-year-old Louis, 8-year-old Jenny, and 5-year-old Betty, had perished in the blaze. He said the fire had been caused by faulty wiring. He said the heat had been intense enough to completely incinerate their remains. And that was supposed to be the end of it. But for George and Jenny Sutter, it was only the beginning. Because there were no remains. None at all. Not a single bone. Not a fragment of teeth. Nothing. Jenny could not accept that. She began conducting her own experiments. She burned animal bones, chicken bones, beef joints, pork chop bones in a fire, and every single time the bones survived. She contacted a crematorium operator who told her that even at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, human bones do not fully disintegrate. The Sutter house fire had burned at a far lower temperature and for about 45 minutes. Various household appliances had been found in the wreckage, still identifiable. The idea that 5 human bodies had been completely erased from existence in that same fire was, by every professional measure, almost impossible. And the strange details kept piling up. A telephone repairman later examined the Sutter property and found that the phone lines had not been burned through. They had been cut, cleanly, deliberately. The missing ladder was eventually found, discarded in a ditch some distance from the house. And someone came forward with a claim that a bus driver had seen figures on the road that night throwing objects onto the Sutter roof. The family also found a hard rubber device near the ruins that George believed to be some kind of incendiary device, consistent with the thud and rolling sound that Jenny had heard on the roof before the fire. And then came the sightings. A woman reported that during the fire she had seen the Sutter children being driven away from the house in an unfamiliar car. Another woman said she had seen the children at a hotel in Charleston the morning after the fire, accompanied by 2 adults she did not recognize. She said the children were quiet, almost eerily so, and that the adults refused to speak with hotel staff. George and Jenny hired private investigators. They wrote letters to the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover himself responded, but the bureau declined to take the case. George traveled across the country chasing leads. A woman in St. Louis wrote to say Martha was in a convent. A tip came from Texas, where someone claimed to have overheard a conversation in a bar about a Christmas Eve fire in West Virginia. Someone in Florida said the children were with a distant relative of Jenny's. Every lead went cold. In 1949, 4 years after the fire, the family had the site excavated. They found human vertebrae in the dirt, but the bones showed no evidence of fire damage, no charring at all. They were sent to the Smithsonian Institution for analysis, and the report concluded that the vertebrae belonged to a single individual, likely a male between the ages of 16 and 22. Maurice had been 14. It was, the report said, possible but not probable that the bones were his, and the complete lack of charring raised a troubling question. If those bones had been in the fire, they would have shown damage. But they didn't, which meant they may not have been there at all. And then there was the fire chief. Years after the blaze, it came to light that Chief Morris had quietly told a local minister that he had, in fact, found something in the ruins. A human heart. He said he had placed it in a small box, buried it, and never told the Soder family. When George and Jenny finally learned this and demanded he show them where it was buried, they dug up the box and brought it to a funeral director. The funeral director examined the contents and said it was not a human heart. It was a beef liver, and it appeared to be fresh. Not fire damaged, not old, but fresh. That detail alone is enough to keep you awake. In 1952, George and Jenny erected a massive billboard along Route 16 near Fayetteville. On it were the photographs of their 5 missing children, dark-haired and wide-eyed, staring out at every car that passed. Beneath the photos were their names, their ages, and a single haunting question. What was their fate? The billboard offered a reward. First, $5,000. Then, $10,000. For nearly 4 decades, anyone driving that stretch of road would see those faces. But the most chilling detail of the entire case came in 1968, more than 20 years after the fire. Jenny went to the mailbox one day and found an envelope addressed to her. No return address. Postmarked from somewhere in Kentucky. Inside was a photograph of a young man, maybe in his mid-20s, with dark curly hair and brown eyes. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a cryptic message. It read, Louis Soder, I love brother Frankie, you little boys, and 91, 32, or 35. George and Jenny stared at the photo. The resemblance to their son Louis, who had been 9 years old the night of the fire, was unmistakable. The same straight nose, the same tilt of the left eyebrow. They were shaken. They hired yet another private investigator and sent him to Kentucky to follow the lead. He contacted the family once to say he had information. Then he disappeared. He never heard from him again. George and Jenny were afraid that if they published the photograph or the name of the town on the postmark, they might put their son in danger. So instead, they added the image to the billboard and hung an enlarged copy above their fireplace. George gave an interview not long after. He said, "Time is running out for us, but we only want to know. If they did die in the fire, we want to be convinced. Otherwise, we want to know what happened to them." George Soder died in 1969, still searching. Jenny lived on for 2 more decades, and she erected a fence around her property and began adding rooms onto her home, building layer after layer between herself and the outside world. She wore black every single day from the night of the fire until the day she died in 1989. It was only after her death that the family finally took the billboard down. Sylvia Souther Paxton, the youngest surviving child, the one who was just 2 years old the night everything changed, carried the weight of the mystery for the rest of her life. She promised her parents she would never let the story die. She pursued leads, she spoke to journalists, she believed until the very end that her brothers and sisters had not died in that fire. Sylvia passed away in 2021. She was 79 years old, and she never found out what happened to them. And neither has anyone else. 5 children. A house fire on Christmas Eve. No remains, no answers, and a photograph in the mail from a stranger. A private investigator who vanished. A fire chief who buried a beef liver and called it a heart. The Souther children have never been found. The case has never been solved. And somewhere along Route 16 in Fayetteville, West Virginia, the space where that billboard once stood is now just an ordinary stretch of road. But the question it asks is still hanging in the air the same way it has for 80 years. What was their fate? My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the crime coroner. Much love and bliss.